Operations planned for the night relied heavily on coordination that daylight normally made easier. In Korea during 1950 and 1951, nighttime movements offered tactical advantages, including concealment from observation and reduced vulnerability to enemy artillery. However, these advantages came with substantial risks. Units moving in darkness struggled to maintain formation and contact. Navigation became difficult even with maps and compasses. Communication between elements was unreliable. Coordination that seemed straightforward during planning proved challenging during execution. Commanders accepted these risks when operational objectives justified them, but the margin for error was always narrow. One such operation was planned for late autumn 1950 in the Central Sector. The objective involved a battalion-sized movement to occupy high ground overlooking a valley through which enemy forces were believed to be moving supplies. Intelligence reports suggested the ridgeline was lightly defended or possibly unoccupied. Seizing the position during darkness would allow the battalion to be in place at dawn, controlling the valley and interdicting enemy movement. The plan called for movement beginning at 2200 hours, with units reaching their objectives by 0300 hours, well before first light around 0600 hours. The battalion consisted of 3 rifle companies and a headquarters element, approximately 700 men total. Supporting elements, including mortars and machine gun sections, would move with the companies. The route followed a valley floor initially, then climbed steep slopes to reach the ridgeline objectives. Distance from the line of departure to the farthest objective measured approximately 6 kilometers, with an elevation gain of nearly 400 meters. Under daylight conditions with clear terrain, this movement might require 2 to 3 hours. At night over rough ground, planners estimated 4 to 5 hours would be necessary. Preparation included reconnaissance of the route during daylight hours by company commanders and selected personnel. They identified landmarks and difficult sections, though visibility and perspective changed dramatically between day and night. Maps showed the general terrain but lacked detail about vegetation, small ravines, and other features that could affect movement. Coordination between companies emphasized maintaining contact and designated rally points where units would regroup if separated. Radio communication would link companies to battalion headquarters, with wire communication to be established once positions were occupied. The movement began on schedule at 2200 hours. Temperatures measured near freezing with clear skies and no moon. Visibility was limited to a few meters without artificial light, which operational security prohibited. Soldiers moved in column, each man maintaining contact with the one ahead by sound and occasional touch. Progress was slow from the start as the lead elements navigated by compass and terrain features barely visible in darkness. The first challenge emerged within the first hour. The valley floor that had appeared relatively open during daylight reconnaissance contained more obstacles than expected. Small streams, rocky areas, and patches of dense vegetation forced the column to detour repeatedly. Each detour consumed time and created uncertainty about position. The lead company commander attempted to maintain his intended route, but found himself making constant small adjustments that gradually diverged from the planned path. Communication between companies functioned initially, but began experiencing difficulties as terrain separated the units. Radio transmission became intermittent as the column stretched over distance and ridges blocked line of sight. Messages became garbled or failed to transmit completely. The battalion commander, moving with the headquarters element in the middle of the column, received incomplete reports from the lead company and lost contact entirely with the trailing company for extended periods. His understanding of the overall situation was fragmentary. By midnight, approximately 2 hours into the movement, the lead company had covered perhaps half the planned distance. The slower than anticipated pace meant the timeline was already compromised. The company commander reported this delay to battalion headquarters, noting that reaching objectives by 0300 hours was no longer realistic. The battalion commander faced a decision about whether to continue with the plan despite the delay or to adjust objectives. He chose to continue, reasoning that even a delayed occupation of the high ground would achieve the mission's purpose. The climb to the ridgeline began around 0100 hours. The slope was steeper than maps had indicated, and vegetation made movement more difficult. Soldiers climbed using hands as well as feet in some sections, struggling to maintain formation while carrying weapons and equipment. The noise of movement increased as equipment rattled and soldiers called quietly to maintain contact. The tactical requirement for silence was partially abandoned in favor of maintaining unit cohesion, a choice that reflected the practical reality that a dispersed unit would be ineffective even if it achieved surprise. Around 0200 hours, the lead elements of the first company reached what they believed was the ridgeline objective. The terrain matched the general description from maps, but in darkness, confirming the exact position proved difficult. The company commander attempted to orient himself using a compass and the slope of the ground, but without clear landmarks visible, certainty was impossible. He reported reaching the objective to battalion headquarters, though he privately questioned whether he was exactly where intended. The second company, following behind the first, lost contact with the lead elements during the climb. In darkness on steep terrain, the column had separated at some point. The second company commander halted his unit and attempted to re-establish communication by radio. After several attempts, he reached battalion headquarters but could not contact the first company directly. The battalion commander instructed him to continue toward the objective, assuming he would link up with the first company at the top. The third company, moving last in the column, had fallen further behind. Difficult terrain and the slower pace of soldiers at the rear of long columns meant they were still on the valley floor when the lead company reported reaching the ridgeline. The company commander reported his position to battalion headquarters, noting that his unit would not reach the objective by the planned time. The battalion commander acknowledged this but provided no new instructions, leaving the third company to continue moving as rapidly as conditions permitted. As the lead company began establishing defensive positions on what they believed was the ridgeline, soldiers reported hearing movement in the darkness ahead of them. The sounds suggested people moving, possibly enemy forces. The company commander faced uncertainty about whether to engage, hold position, or attempt to determine the source of the sounds. Engaging might reveal his position unnecessarily if the sounds were simply animals or civilians. Holding position risked allowing enemy forces to approach undetected. Attempting reconnaissance in darkness with his unit not fully assembled seemed unwise. He chose to hold position and report the contact to battalion headquarters. The report took several minutes to transmit due to poor radio conditions. The battalion commander, receiving fragmentary information about possible enemy presence, could not assess the situation clearly. He instructed the company commander to use his judgment, but avoid decisive engagement until daylight when the situation could be better understood. This guidance was sound, but offered limited practical help to a commander facing immediate uncertainty. Around 0300 hours, the planned time for all units to be in position, the actual situation was substantially different from the plan. The first company occupied a position they believed was correct, but could not confirm. The second company was still climbing and had not yet reached the ridgeline. The third company remained on the valley floor, perhaps an hour behind schedule. Battalion headquarters had incomplete information about all three companies' exact positions and status. The coordination that the plan assumed would occur had not materialized. Dawn was still 3 hours away. Continuing the operation meant occupying positions in darkness without clear understanding of the terrain or enemy dispositions. The battalion commander considered options. Withdrawing before dawn would abandon the mission without attempting to achieve objectives. Continuing risked having units in uncertain positions when daylight revealed the actual situation. He decided to instruct companies to hold current positions until first light, then reassess. This decision reflected acceptance that the original plan had become unworkable. The instruction to hold positions reached the first company clearly, but only reached the second and third companies after delays and repeated transmissions. By the time all units understood the new guidance, it was approaching 0400 hours. The second company halted its climb and established a temporary position on the slope. The third company stopped in the valley, setting security while awaiting further orders. The battalion was now dispersed across several kilometers with limited mutual support and unclear tactical advantage. As soldiers waited for dawn, the temperature dropped and fatigue from hours of movement in darkness began, affecting everyone. The physical exhaustion combined with uncertainty about the situation created conditions where alertness decreased precisely when it was most needed. Squad leaders moved among their soldiers, keeping them awake and alert, but the strain was evident. Some soldiers fell asleep despite the cold and the tactical situation. First light came around 0600 hours as planned. With improving visibility, the actual positions of units became apparent. The first company discovered they were approximately 200 meters west of the intended ridgeline position. The terrain they occupied offered some observation over the valley, but was not the dominant high ground the plan had identified. The second company found themselves on a slope with no clear defensive advantage and exposed to observation from higher ground to their east. The third company remained in the valley with no cover and no clear route to join the other companies quickly. More significantly, daylight revealed enemy positions on the actual ridgeline objective that the first company had missed in darkness. A Chinese unit of unknown size occupied prepared positions overlooking the valley and the approach routes the American battalion had used. These positions had been occupied throughout the night while American forces maneuvered in the darkness below and beside them. The enemy had observed or heard the American movement but had not engaged, perhaps waiting for daylight to reveal the full situation. The battalion commander, receiving reports from all companies as daylight allowed better communication, recognized that the operation had failed to achieve its objectives. His units were dispersed in poor positions and faced an enemy that held the key terrain. Continuing offensive action would require attacking uphill against prepared positions without the element of surprise. This was precisely the type of costly engagement that the nighttime operation had been designed to avoid. He made the decision to withdraw. The order went to all companies to disengage and return to the original line of departure. The withdrawal would occur in daylight, accepting the exposure in exchange for better control and coordination. Artillery support was requested to cover the movement and discourage enemy interference. The withdrawal began around 0700 hours, approximately 9 hours after the operation had started. The movement back covered the same difficult terrain but proceeded more rapidly in daylight. Units maintained better cohesion and navigated more efficiently when they could see the ground and landmarks. Enemy forces did not interfere significantly, perhaps content to have held their positions without losses. Occasional mortar fire landed near the withdrawing American units but caused minimal casualties. By mid-morning, the battalion had returned to its starting positions. Casualties from the operation included several soldiers injured during the night, movement over rough terrain, and a few wounded by the brief enemy mortar fire during withdrawal. No soldiers were killed. Equipment losses were minimal. The cost in physical terms was modest. The cost in time, effort, and the failure to achieve objectives was more significant. The operation illustrated how nighttime movements in difficult terrain could unravel despite careful planning. The assumptions about movement rates, terrain conditions, and coordination proved optimistic when tested by actual conditions. Communication limitations prevented commanders from understanding the situation as it developed, making timely adjustments impossible. The accumulated delays and navigational uncertainties meant that by the time units were in position to assess the situation, the advantage of darkness was gone and the plan was no longer viable. Lessons from operations like this one influenced subsequent planning and training. The importance of realistic time estimates for night movement was emphasized. Communication plans needed redundancy and acknowledgement of likely failures. Objectives needed to account for the possibility that exact positions might not be achieved in darkness. These lessons came from experience rather than theory, learned through operations that did not succeed as planned. The learning process was gradual and costly, paid for by soldiers who executed plans based on assumptions that reality tested and often disproved. I upload new interesting military stories every day. Follow to don't miss out.